Why are people buying the Glock 45? When you look at the size of this handgun, it's pretty much the best of both worlds. You have a Glock 19 slide and a Glock 17 frame, which for a lot of people is just the best sized handgun. Working our way top to bottom, here we have a Gen 5 Glock 45. They only made the Glock 45 with a Gen 5 platform. There's no Gen 3 or 4. So when we look at this, it's kind of your typical Gen 5 slide. You got front slide serrations. Here we have the MOS, so we have a optics mounting system. And on the front of the gun, you have the nose cuts of a Gen 5 Glock 19 or Glock 17. In here, we're actually running a true precision threaded barrel with a Herrington Arms HG95 compensator on there. One of my favorite things about this gun is gonna be that you can put a compensator on here and not have as much length. Obviously, we're a comp company, so this is something we really appreciate when companies offer handguns of this size. Throwing a compensator on here, you're not gonna add an insane amount of length. If you do this compensator on a Glock 17, you're gonna get a half an inch longer setup, which is not great for concealed carry and even duty, which Jake will probably dive into more later. Sitting on top of the slide, we have a Holosun 508T. We run this dot on a lot of guns. Runs great. And underneath of it, we have the CH Precision optics plate. I think it's just a better plate than the standard MOS plate that Glock actually gives you. It's just machined a little bit thicker. It has better threads. CH gives you a bunch of different screws for your optic. So you just get a lot more out of this plate system than you do the MOS. Nothing wrong with the MOS. It's just really thin. It's never been the best system in the world. So I like this one quite a bit. Moving our way down, we have the Cogworks, now Primatia slide lock, slide release. This is great. It's ambidextrous, so lefties like Jake have a really good time shooting. They can train properly, and it is extended and up out of the way. So if you're a person like me and you end up riding this slide lock, slide release, a lot of times you won't get slide lock on an empty mag, or you'll even find yourself riding the slide lock up, and you'll get slide lock when shooting with a full magazine. It's incredibly inconvenient, and it will just slow down your drill time. And if you're in a self-defense situation, obviously you're gonna have to look at your gun, assess the situation. It just adds a lot of time. So I think this slide lock, slide release does a lot for shooting, especially people that have a really high and tight grip. With any Gen 5 Glock, obviously we have the front slide serrations and the rear slide serrations. These have never been my favorite. They're very thin, they're very shallow, but they work. You know, there are a lot of better options out there with aftermarket slides. So hopefully Glock does a little bit better with the Gen 6 system, but at least they're on there. I would just have a hard time with the Gen 4 slides. I would find myself slipping down the slide on a Gen 4 slide because there was nothing to grab onto. It was just really smooth. So it is nice that they at least included this. And in typical Glock fashion, you got plastic sights out here. I don't even know if people use these that much anymore. A lot of time people throw optics on or replace these right away. I would really like Glock to put better sights on here for the Gen 6, just as a way for Glock to kind of get with the times. Everybody's running steel sights now. If you're gonna have something you're gonna depend on and you only have one sighting system being iron sights, you should probably get some better sights. Moving our way down to the frame, here's where you're gonna see the other feature of the Glock 45. So not only do you have a Glock 19 slide essentially, but now you have a Glock 17 frame. And I think a lot of people prefer this. People with big hands find that the Glock 19 could feel a little tight, especially if you throw a Magwell on there. So the 17 is gonna give you a little bit more room. It's gonna give you a little bit more capacity. Otherwise, it's just pretty much the same thing. It's just an extended Glock 19 frame to be the 17 length. So really not much is going on different here than your standard Glock 19 or your Glock 17. But what this is doing is it's kind of meshing everything together. For me, this is kind of a controversial point. I find that with my new grip, I prefer the Glock 17 length. It gives me a little bit more room. What I found when I grip the handgun, the Glock 17 length feels really nice. You can see that my hand fully encompasses that frame. So it's gonna feel very roomy and comfortable. And if you add a Magwell on there, it's gonna pull your hand up into the gun nicely. This gun just kind of feels very balanced. It feels like the appropriate length frame and the appropriate length slide. So I think that's why it's becoming so popular, is it's kind of becoming the new full-size universal handgun. We're seeing a lot of people carry this on duty. We're seeing people conceal carry this. So people that prefer a full-size handgun over the subcompact 43X or really any subcompact handgun on the market, they're kind of leaning into this gun and it's becoming pretty popular. Another side benefit of the Glock 45 is you actually get the 17 round capacity of a 17. Obviously this is important for a lot of reasons. An extra 2 rounds is great. You know, and a lot of people are gonna say you could put a 17 round magazine in a Glock 19. you can definitely do that. But there's a lot of people out there that really want a standard OEM magazine to come with 17 right out the gate, and then you could throw a +5 on here and you're still gonna get more capacity than a Glock 19 magazine. Again, you could throw this in a Glock 19, but there's a lot of people that just want to run the magazine that came with the gun. You already get 3 of them, so I kind of get both sides of it. Nevertheless, the Glock 45 does come with the 17 round capacity, which added capacity is always a good thing. I guess if you could add a downside to this is a larger frame. So when you conceal carry it, you could see some more printing. You know, appendix kind of alleviates some of that. At the end of the day, if you're a smaller framed person with a tighter t-shirt, you're gonna see this printing. And maybe a Glock 19 would be a better option if you're gonna be only concealed carrying this handgun. But if you're a bigger guy with large hands and you get more out of this 17 length frame, you're probably gonna have a better time concealed carrying it because you're a bigger guy. It's just gonna completely blend in with your body and you're not gonna have too many issues. So when it comes to the Glock 45, I think your body size is gonna make a big difference on how well you can conceal carry this handgun. So obviously we're not running a stock trigger in here. This is the Overwatch precision trigger shoe. I'm kind of torn on this trigger. I like it more than a stock OEM Glock 45 trigger, but it doesn't even shake a stick at the Glock performance trigger. This Overwatch precision trigger shoe is pretty good. I found that shooting it with gloves on, I have a hard time fully pressing that safety. So that was kind of annoying when shooting with gloves on. I also found that it's really hard to shoot this trigger fast with or without gloves. I think if you're serious about putting any aftermarket trigger in here, the Glock performance trigger is a great option. We've played with a lot of aftermarket triggers, and honestly, I think that's probably one of the best ones out there. That one just has a much better take up, a much better break, and a much better reset than really any aftermarket trigger we found. So talking about the ergonomics of this handgun, it's a Gen 5 Glock 17. There's really nothing that feels different about it. And even if you've held a Glock 19, it feels very similar. You just have a little bit more room in the bottom. I've never been a fan of the grip angle for a Glock 19 or a Glock 17. It's very aggressive. I find when I pick up a Glock for the first time in a while, I have to pull down to find my optic. You know, the grip angle is just different than a 1911, a P320, and pretty much most of the other striker-fired guns on the market. So it's an acquired taste. I see why they did what they did. The actual ergonomics of the gun aren't terrible. The grip texture feels appropriate. It might be a little bit on the soft side. I like that there are no finger grooves. Feels very comfortable. And I've actually been changing my opinion on the Glock ergonomics, starting with this backstrap system. I've never been one to like the backstrap system. I thought you were just adding a bunch of plastic to the back, adding a bunch of length. And while that's true, I think it's more noticeable on the Glock 19 for me. On the 19, I still don't like running a backstrap. For me, it just feels really uncomfortable. But on a Glock 17 or a Glock 45, the backstrap is almost a must. It makes this length of pull significantly better, and it makes the ergonomics feel a lot better. And I'm not sure what the difference would be there. There's not a lot of length added to the bottom of this. So how vertical length would affect horizontal length, I'm not sure, honestly. But I found on the 45-17, backstrap is the ticket for me. Shooting many of Jake's Glock 45s, this became very apparent for me. But again, on the 19, I don't prefer the backstrap. So I'm not sure what science is going on here with the ergonomics. Just know it's a very simple gun with very simple ergonomics. It's not gonna be the best gun you've ever felt. There's a lot of other guns out there that have better ergonomics. But when you're looking at shooting this gun from a fundamental standpoint, I think it kind of checks all the boxes. Sure, nothing's perfect, but nothing's that bad either. When it comes to the mag release system on here, I think Gen 5 is the best Glock mag release system from Glock. Gen 1 through 3, I was not a fan of. Gen 4 changed that and made it a lot better. And Gen 5, I think, is the exact same way. Feels really good. The button is rather large. It's easy to push. The spring on here isn't too heavy. It is still pretty positive. Glock still uses these plastic magazines. With the friction of plastic on plastic, it kind of slows that magazine down when it comes out of the gun. I found myself having to do that John Wick flip sometimes if I perform a reload in front of my face and I'm a little too horizontal. It kind of gets stuck up there. You kind of have to flick it out of the way. I would love for Glock to go to a steel magazine in the future. It's probably never gonna happen. Glock is so rooted in this Glock magazine that I just don't see it happening for Gen 6, but that is one of my biggest complaints about Glock is gonna be that friction. Obviously, you can get around this with throwing a steel base plate or a mag extension on there. It's definitely gonna help, but when you're trying to push the boundaries of speed, especially for me, I've been focusing on reloads a lot for the last couple years. And I found that anytime I perform a reload with a Glock, it's just inherently slightly slower than like a P320. So since we're talking about reloads and magazines, let's go ahead and talk about the Magwell in this gun. I think they did a good job up until the tip of the Magwell, and that's where they kind of butched it. There's a nice funnel in here, but then there's this really weird lip of plastic. I think that's caused from the injection molding process. I don't really know what they were doing there. It looks like it's seated too far into the gun, And again, they got this big goofy gouge in here. I understand why it's there, you know, so that you can get your thumb in here and strip a stuck magazine. All of it makes sense. But one of the first things I like to do with any Glock is either plug this or get a Magwell that plugs it. It's just gonna help a lot with reloads. Almost everyone that talks about a Glock reload ends up catching this at some point and butching a reload. So I don't know why Glock still hasn't fixed that. Hopefully in Gen 6, they come up with a better way to give you clearance to strip a Glock magazine. Time will tell with that one. So it's definitely not the best Magwell in the world, but I also don't think it's the worst. I've seen a lot of full-size guns that have terrible Magwells, and I think Glock's kind of in the middle of the road here. So collectively, when you look at this gun as a whole, what are you gonna pay for it? Well, Glock has very strict map pricing, and you're pretty much gonna pay $620 for it no matter where you go. I think this is a pretty fair price, but maybe a scotch high for what you get. There's a lot of great guns out there that are in that same price range that come with better sights, that come with a better optic system, that come with a better trigger. But I think what you're paying for there is Glock reliability, is the low bore axis and the finishing on the slide. These guns are built pretty tough. They can take a lot of stress, a lot of abuse, and you can kind of get away with not cleaning these for a very long time and they're just gonna keep running. So I think that price is elevated simply because of the reliability of the handgun.
So first thing we'll kind of hop into is my experience with the Glock platform. As most of you guys know, I'm still active in law enforcement. Have been for 5.5 years now, almost 6 years. I am a law enforcement firearms instructor as well. In that time, I'd say probably 2 or 3 years of it, I carried a Glock 17. Also in the private sector, I train with the 17 regularly. On that platform alone, probably hundreds of thousands of rounds. It was definitely my baby for a very long time. And then when I started getting into the kind of compensator end of things, I switched over to the Glock 45. So as I said, the compensators is kind of like what got me to switch over to Glock 45s. I want to say like 2021, 2022 areas when that stuff became kind of hot and you started seeing law enforcement carrying actually RDSs on their handguns, some guys running Magwells, mag extensions, and then also compensators. I think what this whole discussion boils down to is what you want to do with your gun. I found that adding a threaded barrel to a Glock 45 puts it at 17 length, so I didn't have to buy new holsters or any new attachments or anything like that. Now, when you add a compensator or a threaded barrel to a Glock 45, depending on who the manufacturer is, what the specs are, you can go a little bit longer than a 17 or a little bit shorter. I've been running the 6354 RDS for a very long time. And I've never had any compatibility issues either with a Herrington comp, Radian, Parker Mountain, Mayhem Syndicate, all these comps that I've had throughout my career. I've never had any holster issues with them. What I have had to do is pop the light plunger out and sometimes pop the muzzle plunger out. They're both in the bottom of that holster. And even regardless, compensators and threaded barrels aside, I always pop those out because I've taken a lot of vehicle classes, and those of you that have done that know that dirt, sand, rocks, other people's brass, your brass get all caught up in your holster in an environment like that, and you cannot reholster your gun if you have a piece of brass hanging out in the bottom of it, or rocks, or whatever it is. So it made sense for me to switch over. It was not a very hard decision to make. So like duty holsters and stuff aside, I carry Tier 1 conceal for my conceal carry holsters. You have to request the bottom to be open. Once you do that, you can pretty much fit any slide length you want into that as long as you're carrying the same light, like X300, TLR7, TLR2HL, TLR1HL, whatever it is. So I've never had any issues when it comes to putting a Glock 45 in there, a Glock 17, or a Glock 45 with the comp. So it's just made things very easy on that front. Now kind of getting into the why of the Glock 45, we have seen this pendulum swing in the gun community, and a lot of times we are pulling things that happened in the past and bringing them into modern times, and the Glock 45 kind of falls into that same category. It's been a thing throughout history that people, end users, want a larger grip and a shorter barrel, a shorter slide, whatever the application was, because I mean, this goes back all the way to revolver, revolver times, 1911 times when those were common carried guns. And now kind of hopping into the meat and potato of things, the Glock 45 was stemmed from the 19X, which was made for the military contract for the new handgun. As everyone knows, the SIG ended up winning that, but the Glock 19X was a huge contender in that trial. Glock realized they can kind of stem into the law enforcement market with this, and if I'm not mistaken, Border Patrol was the first agency to be receiving Glock 45s. So in conclusion, the whole spiel between the 19X and the Glock 45 is actually a very old concept that we now brought into modern times and apply it to modern firearms. So I've actually found so much value in the Glock 45 that I've sold off all my Gen 4 and Gen 3 17s. I've pretty much completely switched over to Gen 5 G45. I've done this because of the way I like to equip pistols, the way I like to trick them out. I touched on it in kind of like why I originally was gravitated towards it. I think you should be putting a compensator in a gun. If it can fit in your holster and it fits your lifestyle, I think you should be. At the end of a gunfight or at the end of a competition, nobody comes up to you and shakes your hand and says, hey, good job managing all that recoil. That's not how it goes. You either win or you don't. You either put bullets in places you want them to go as fast as you can and as accurately as possible, or you don't. So I've always been a big proponent of compensators. I've been carrying a comp on my duty handgun the last 2.5 years. And all these guns are essentially a reflection of that. This is the first Glock 45 I ever bought. It did not start in its true form like this. I ended up having it sent off, getting Cerakoted, stippled, and such. For those of you that remember, these were like the hot comps back in the day. 2018, 2017, 2019, the Mayhem Syndicate comps were all the rage because they were like the first micro compensator. I believe I paid like $450, $500, which back in 2018 for a barrel and comp is a crap ton of money. I also have a Holosun 508T on here. Love this optic, been carrying it for years. I have an Edgar Sherman Magwell on here, and there's the TLR 1HL. You cannot beat the price point and the output of a Streamlight, especially with their handgun series. These are also super popular in law enforcement. This was one of the first lights I carried when I was first getting into law enforcement as well. This RMR cut on this Glock slide is actually cut so low I can use the Amerigo sights on it. I don't have suppressor height sights on it. Not all these guns have backup sights for my RDSs, but this is definitely one of the ones I have it for because I carry this gun. And then also note the CAGWorks slide release on this as well. Huge game changer. And then also there is a Glock performance trigger in this, which is way better than the factory trigger. If you get like 5,000 rounds through a factory trigger, it polishes itself out pretty good. You pretty much get right to the point with it if you slap a Glock performance trigger in your gun. This is another one of my Glock 45s. It's been a huge training gun for me. It's kind of taken the shelf since about last year. This was also the first Glock I put a closed emitter on. When closed emitters started becoming all the rage, I immediately got a Glock that was cut for one, and the Aimpoint Acro was one of those. Glock performance trigger because it's the best Glock trigger that is made aftermarket wise right now. Also, again, with the Edgar Sherman Magwell, one of the best Magwells on the market, also priced the best as well. The slide's done by Parker Mountain, and so is the comp. One of the reasons why I was brought on to this team was my experience with compensated handguns. We brought this gun in specifically just to see how it held up basically with these other comps that we have on the table in front of us. All right, guys, so obviously 19X right here, no thrills kind of gun. I haven't really done anything crazy with this yet. Obviously, it's got a Herrington Arms universal compensator on the front, TLR 1HL on the bottom, just stock tritium iron sights, nothing crazy here. It doesn't even have an aftermarket trigger. All right, and now kind of getting into my main squeeze of the Glock 45s. You guys have probably seen this a ton on the channel. I shoot this gun a ton. This has well over 20,000 rounds through it, probably in like the 25,000 round mark. This gun has been a sewing machine. This is, as of right now, this has been its final form. This gun has gone through a few forms. It started off just pretty much as a plain Jane, like black Glock, had the slides Cerakoted like a tungsten gray, and had the lower stippled and all that. You guys are probably noticing repeating themes throughout all these platforms that I'm bringing up. Always have a red dot, always have a Magwell, and typically have a compensator of some kind. In my opinion, there is no disadvantage of having them. They're only advantages. So again, start from the bottom up. Edgar Sherman Magwell, again, one of the best ones on the market. Just a stock Glock lower, really no bells and whistles there. It's been stippled. I do have a back strap on the back of all my Glocks. I use a large back strap just to give myself extra room, extra real estate for my offhand support hand, when I'm building a firing grip. Again, Glock performance trigger, huge fan. X300 Lite with the QVO thumb cliff. I forget the exact name of this, but basically it's for pressing your thumb down on it when you're building your firing hand grip. Also, if you guys are noticing, there is Cordura wrap on both the optic and the light. That's from Ranger Wrap. I do that a lot with my firearms, whether it's pistols or rifles. I think it's just a nice little upgrade to have. It's something aesthetically that's nice, and then also there's an advantage to it too because it's, giving your gun a less IR signature, and if you're into that prepping, being prepared type of mindset, that's an important thing to keep in mind. On top, I have another closed emitter. This is a Steiner MPS. This has been a fantastic optic for me. I have zero complaints. The only thing that's like kind of lame is the battery life's pretty low on it. We have a Herrington Arms HC95 on the front and a true precision barrel in the gun. I think I've already kind of brought this up, but this gun has been fantastic. This is one of my favorite guns to shoot. I have thousands and thousands of rounds through this gun. So overall, for me, the G45 is the one to go to if you're into kind of tuning your own bells and whistles, and you want a more versatile platform. For me personally, I kind of launched in the compensator game hardcore because I found value in it. And at that point, I was like, it makes sense to do this with a Glock 45 because then most of these comps are putting it at a Glock 17 length, so I can just throw it right in a Glock 17 holster. If I were to do all this to a Glock 17, I'd have to get a 34 holster, and those are kind of a little bit harder to find now. And it just feels too long. It's not really something I'm super into. If you're getting a Glock 45, putting a compensator on it, kind of keeps the gun at a normal length, and that's kind of where I found value with the Glock 45. Guys, I think the other thing to mention here is I really don't believe at all that we're the only ones that feel this way about this handgun. The Glock 45, in my opinion, of the Glock realm of handguns, has definitely been kind of the flagship model, especially like speaking from a law enforcement perspective. There are still guys carrying Glock 22s, Glock 17s for sure, but anyone that's on an up and up department, kind of like getting with the times, typically running a dot on a Glock 45. And you know, I think a lot of departments, a lot of people, a lot of end users have found value in this gun, and that's why we're kind of seeing it be as prevalent as it is.
What are some of the great alternatives if you're not a fan of the Glock 45? When you boil it down, there's not too many options out there, but there is the Walther 4-inch PDP, a custom P320. With the 320, you can do the shorter slide, but you're still gonna have the full-size frame. You know, most people throw a compensator in there and nest that compensator. However, you could also grind down the front if you're really trying to reduce some of that length. Sig Sauer does not offer a version yet where a 320 kind of mimics this Glock 45. And we believe there's a similar offering from Canik. But let us know, do you guys know of any other guns that use this kind of platform with a shorter slide on a longer frame? Drop a comment down below if we kind of missed any of those. So at the end of the day, who is the Glock 45 for? And I think it's for the people that like the Glock 17, but really don't want all that extra length. The 45 is a great compensator host. Obviously, you're getting some of that length back. So if you're okay with the Glock 17 length, but if you kind of want to cheat the system a little bit and remove that 1/2 inch of slide length, you can do that with the Glock 45. At the end of the day, for a lot of people, the Glock 17 Pros don't outweigh the slide length you get. For a lot of people, it's just unnecessary, or they want to kind of future-proof their build. Maybe they want to throw a compensator on it in the future and kind of cheat that a little bit. But drop a comment down below. I'm really curious. Are you somebody that's going to be picking a Glock 19, a 17, or a 45? Glock has a lot of great options, and we'd love to hear what you guys are thinking. If you guys like this video, we'd appreciate a like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.